If there's no Zeus, why should I follow Zeus's law? Does that make sense? And obviously I'm seeing a lot of parallels in my mind to kind of more modern humanism, and it can tempt me to want to reach for a bow like Odysseus and say, I'm going to dish out, justice. That shot where she puts her hand down the guy's throat. This is not going to be a review of the Odyssey because it's not just a product. If you're wondering if you should go see it, you should go see the Odyssey. I am a Christian filmmaker, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on the film. So this is going to be more like an analysis and engagement of some of the themes in the Odyssey. So yeah, this is not going to be a review. If you're wondering if you should see it, you should definitely see it. And this is going to be more of like an analysis and engagement with the themes that Nolan put into the Odyssey, specifically looking at 3 ways that Nolan changed the original story. Those 3 changes to the Odyssey are changing Odysseus's internal conflict, reinterpreting Zeus's law, and removing the gods as characters from the story. So that's kind of going to be the structure of this video. But first, before we do that, I wanted to say a word on adaptations in general. So obviously, because of the popularity of IP being adapted right now in films and TV shows, there's a lot of opinions and discussion around what should an adaptation be. Specifically, is this a new original work, or should it be kind of more or less the same as exactly what it's adapting? And right now, audiences are definitely more on the side that you should be very, very, very faithful to the original, which is totally understandable because of all the different disappointments we've had in different adaptations where, the director doesn't really have a lot of respect for the source material and then goes off and makes something really atrocious. I know that I have been very disappointed by different adaptations over the years, so I can understand that. But I want to make the argument that I do think that when a director and filmmaker is adapting a work, I think they can and should exercise the freedom to make the work their own and maybe even make it into something else. And that might mean, drawing out different themes, emphasizing different things, taking things out, adding things. I think the filmmaker has that prerogative to do that. And I'm not the only person that thinks that. I mostly actually get that from Andrei Tarkovsky, who is one of the great filmmakers. He believed that in order to adapt a work, you couldn't be a slave to the original. You had to actually consume it, see what resonated with you, see what themes you want to draw out, and then you have to make something new that is wholly your own. That's what he did with Stalker and with Solaris. He made them his own, and that's what even the American equivalent did. Stanley Kubrick, most of his works are adaptations, and yet they're all completely Kubrick's films. 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Shining, even Eyes Wide Shut. These films are based off of existing stories, and yet to greater or lesser degrees, Kubrick has made changes and made them his own. Infamously, The Shining, where Stephen King doesn't really like the adaptation because Kubrick does things different than the original work. And yet, I think The Shining is a masterpiece, So I think filmmakers have the freedom to make the work their own, to explore things, to add things, different elements, and to try and make something really original, new, that has their own voice to it. I think all the great filmmakers do that. We get frustrated with IPs when they do this, with like studios, because there's no heart. But artists have been retelling stories throughout history and making changes to fit their own purposes and their own themes and goals. So I think that's just what storytelling is. So I'm saying all this because I think that sometimes people get very upset when, say, if there's any change from Homer's Odyssey to Nolan's Odyssey, any change is seen as bad because it's a change. And before I say anything, I just want to acknowledge I love Nolan's Odyssey. I love Christopher Nolan as a filmmaker, and I think he has the freedom to make whatever changes he wants. We can evaluate it whether it works, but just because it's a change does not mean it's a bad thing. So I think sometimes people use that, kind of as a knock on a film, just because it's different than the original work, that's seen as inferior. It can be, but I don't think that just because there's a change, that means that it's inferior. So that's my kind of philosophy on adaptation. One thing that I think we can critique an adaptation on if it makes changes, and this is something I will probably bring up, that I'm going to bring up with Nolan's Odyssey, is an original work is written around a certain, theme or idea or purpose, and when you now use it or adapt it for a new purpose or new theme, even if it's slightly different, um, there's the risk that elements can kind of become like vestigial limbs or vestigial organs. This idea that like they served a purpose at one point, but now that there's a new purpose, they no longer serve it, and now they're just kind of there. And later in the video, I'm going to kind of argue that I think that I maybe need to see the movie again, but Nolan's Odyssey at points risks turning features of the Odyssey into vestigial organs where, at least at the moment, I sometimes wonder, wait, what is this doing here now if you're kind of telling the story for this purpose, but that feature originally served this purpose and you're not doing that anymore? So I'll get into that later, but I just wanted to flag that. That's one of the dangers of making adaptation your own. Making an adaptation with your own voice is you have to be really careful of, okay, what was this doing in the original story and what is it going to be doing in my story? So without further ado, let's look at the changes that Nolan made to the Odyssey. Yes, the first change that I want to talk about that Nolan made to the Odyssey is that he changed Odysseus's internal struggle. Shout out to Liza Libes from Pens and Poison. I follow her on Facebook, and she kind of articulated this in a way that I thought, yes, that is what I felt while watching this movie. I don't know about you, but when I watched the Odyssey, there was something about Odysseus's character that just, I couldn't put my finger on it, but like, why did he feel a little different than how I'm used to seeing him presented in, Homer's Odyssey or other adaptations? And even, if you're like me, maybe you even felt a little confusion when it was announced that Matt Damon was going to be playing Odysseus, and you might have thought, like me, like, I don't know if I would put Matt Damon as, might be my first pick to play Odysseus, but fair enough. And he does an amazing job, but I think that was the first hint that Nolan's version of Odysseus was going to be a little different. And that difference, I think, primarily lies in the fact that he changes what Odysseus is struggling with internally. Because in the original, in Homer's Odyssey, I think one of the big things that Odysseus struggles with is hubris and pride. He, is this brilliant soldier. He's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, but he's the smartest. He's the one that came up with the Trojan horse, which in the Odyssey he takes great pride in. What causes all the problems in the Odyssey is that during the Cyclops episode, Odysseus outsmarts the Cyclops, but then he just can't get away. He just can't bring himself to not get the credit for what he has done. He's very proud of what he's done. And so as they're going away, even though he could leave without taking credit, he yells back, Odysseus is my name. Odysseus did this. And that is what kind of sets the events of the Odyssey into play, because then the Cyclops prays to his father Poseidon, who is a very real character in Homer's Odyssey. And because of his hubris, because of his pride, now Poseidon knows who did this to the Cyclops. I don't know if you can hear the thunder outside. We'll see if it makes it into the video. That's what turns Poseidon, the very real character in the story, against Odysseus. And so then this is reiterated throughout the story that Odysseus is kind of prideful. He's kind of hubristic. He wants to take credit. He wants to do things and see things that only he has seen or done. Whereas Nolan's Odysseus is struggling more with guilt over what he has done, specifically with the Trojan horse. And so right there, you already have kind of a difference of how does he feel about the Trojan horse. Nolan's Odysseus is very guilty about that. Which then turns the story less about a humbling of Odysseus and more into a dealing with guilt and trauma about breaking Zeus's law, which we'll talk about later. Which is I think that's a really interesting change. The only issue that I have with it is that it can turn elements in the story that are in the original are elements of Odysseus's pride. Now I don't really know what they're doing. For example, like the siren scene. In the original Homer's Odyssey, Odysseus straps himself to the mast because he wants to be the one man who has heard the siren call, and it kind of shows his pride, his hubris. And yet that scene in Nolan's version, he does that, because I'm not saying he's not prideful in Nolan's version. I'm just saying that's not really what his story is about. It's more just kind of like an element of his character, but it's not like he's dealing with pride. And so then that episode, it, I don't know, certainly his decision to be tied to the mast does not really have anything to do with the rest of the story. I felt, at least. I don't know. Tell me in the comments if you disagree. Because it's not showing his hubris or pride. It has nothing to do with the guilt that he's, feeling about the Trojan War. He says, I want to be the one man who hears the siren song and lives. And yeah, so it kind of felt a little out of place. Like, like because this is a very popular scene and we got to depict it, it's in the movie, but like, and I think I felt this in the movie, that it felt accidental, like this is not actually a crucial part of the story. This is kind of just a little episode of interest, but it didn't really feel suspenseful. It didn't really feel connected to the main story in any significant way, other than that this is another danger that they, run across. And so, yeah, it kind of risks feeling like a vestigial organ. It used to play one role in Homer's Odyssey, and now, because these purposes have changed, now the story is more about his guilt rather than his pride. It can make it kind of feel like, I don't know, what is it doing there? I don't know. Now, I will say, I think modern audiences will connect with, guilt over war a lot more than they're going to resonate with a soldier dealing with pride over what he's done. I think it's very effective at that. I'm just saying my concern is that it makes certain elements to be kind of, vestigial, incidental, accidental, whatever word you want to use. It kind of, I don't know what it's doing in the story anymore. That's what I'm saying. I just really like the siren scene. He does it beautifully. I just wanted it to, I wanted it to feel more weighty, like a significant part of the story. Okay, then now the second change that Nolan makes that I want to talk about is how he reinterprets Zeus's law. The movie is obviously about Zeus's law. They talk about it constantly, over and over and over again. They're talking about Zeus's law, this hospitality to the stranger. That's Zeus's law is kind of how Nolan is talking. That's the word he's using, Zeus's law, to talk about the Greek law of hospitality called xenia. It's a key theme of the movie, about welcoming the stranger. When there's a visitor coming in that you don't know, you want to treat them really well. And the logic is, and this is said in the movie, it's present in the movie. The logic is the same in Homer's Odyssey, which is that you'd never know if a stranger, because you don't know them, maybe they are actually a god in disguise. And so this might actually be Zeus in disguise. And so you want to make sure that you don't upset him. And so you want to treat him really, really well. Thus, Zeus's law. It's important that you understand Zeus's law comes from the idea that Zeus might be disguised as a stranger. That has a few implications. One, meaning this is primarily towards strangers, people that you do not know, guests, because if you know who somebody is, then you probably know that they're not Zeus in disguise. And so the Greek law of xenia mostly applies to guests coming into town. There's actually a really interesting episode in the book of Genesis in the Bible that kind of does something similar to Homer's Odyssey, where angelic beings come down to visit Lot, and they're a guest in his home, and then all of the townspeople knock on his door and want to assault them and to treat them inhospitably. And commentators have noted that there's, this law of xenia is kind of similarly being broken in that story. So yeah, it's this idea that there's angelic or divine beings coming to your house as strangers, and that's why we need to treat all strangers well, because you never know, maybe they actually are a god. And crucially, because if you don't, that god might pour out his wrath on you because you failed to show him hospitality. I think that's another big thing, is not just that it's, yes, that the gods are, worthy of respect. It's also that they're also very powerful. And if you piss one off, it's not going to go well for you. And so, yes, this is a key theme in the movie. It's a key theme in Homer's Odyssey. But what I want to draw attention to is the ways that Nolan kind of reinterprets it to be a little bit broader. At one point, one of the characters, I think it's Penelope, uses Jesus's teaching, who came way after Homer, to Jesus's moral teaching to kind of explain what Zeus's law is, which she says, treat others the way that you want to be treated. It's the golden rule, which there's overlap, absolutely, but it's not exactly the same idea, because the Greek law of Xenia is more specifically towards strangers, whereas Jesus's teaching is more just to everybody, including your enemies. And so in Nolan's version, he's kind of universalizing this idea, and he's doing that very intentionally. He's universalizing it. He's universalizing it in the way that who does it apply to? He's saying it applies to everybody. You treat others how you want to be treated, as well as when one person breaks it, everybody breaks it. This is where I really appreciated this thing that he added to the sea raiders. I think the pirates, these sea raiders, they keep on talking about, and they never really know who they are until there's a big reveal. A decently big reveal where Odysseus says, that he is the sea people, that to burn the walls of Troy is to burn the world entire. That if you break the Zeus's law at one place, then it's this, you are now part of the guilty party who is breaking the world. That's really a very creative thing to do with the story of the Odyssey, and a brilliant way to kind of universalize this theme that I, in one sense, really appreciated. And so I do want to say I am so glad that this movie is getting so much attention, that it is doing so well financially, that people are loving it, and that this cultural phenomenon is basically telling people to treat others how you want to be treated, that every time that you don't, you're kind of like universalized into the guilty party, that you are the same as the sea pirates when you fail to treat the people you love and the people you know with respect. I think that is so important, and I'm glad that a movie this big is communicating that idea. Anytime that a movie in the popular, anytime a popular film is communicating Jesus's teaching in a positive light, in a necessary light, I think I want to celebrate. So in one sense, I'm very glad that and impressed that Nolan made that change. Now, that being said, though, I do also want to say that by kind of inserting Jesus's teaching that we should treat others the way that you want to be treated, and you take that teaching and you import it back several centuries into a Bronze Age, into the mouth of somebody from the Bronze Age, which was a much more brutal time period. It's a bit of an anachronization, and my concern is that it kind of dilutes the uniqueness of what Jesus's moral teaching was, and his very unique contribution to ethics and morality. Because while there are, again, a lot of similarities between what Jesus taught and the idea of Greek Xenia, or Zeus's law, there are also distinct differences. And I think by importing just the general do to others what you'd have them do to you, and you import that back into the mouth of Odysseus or Penelope or whoever, it can lead audiences to think that that was actually an ideal that maybe a Bronze Age civilization had, when that was not the case. It was a very brutal civilization who would respect strangers because they were afraid that they might actually be a god. But for example, if you're looking at how the Bronze Age maybe treated their slave girls, it was not very hospitable, to say the least. It was distinctly Jesus's teaching to care for the outcasts, those who cannot defend themselves, the lowest of society, as well as loving your enemy. These are kind of very unique teachings to Jesus, and I just want to fight for the uniqueness of what he was providing to civilization in those moral teachings. And by making it seem like this is something that everybody has always understood as good, I don't know. Sometimes it kind of undermines in my mind just the radicalness of what Jesus taught, and we can forget that this has not always been the case. Our care for the poor people, our care for widows and orphans, that is not a a common value across civilizations. It is not a common value across time. It was brought to us through especially Jesus Christ. And yeah, so by expanding Zeus's law to kind of have more of a Christian ideal to it, on the one hand, I'm really happy that that's becoming, being treated as something that's good. On the other hand, I don't like that it's removed from the uniqueness of the person of Jesus Christ. Christianity has a similar belief about like this divine identity inside people, and that's why you should treat them well. And it's called the Imago Dei, the image of God. This idea that every human being is made in the image of God, and that's why they're worthy of respect. And that's why when you fail to treat people with respect, there is judgment and there's punishment for failing to love others. Except in Christianity, that the Imago Dei is extended to everybody. Every human being is an image bearer of God. Whereas in the Bronze Age, this was more extended towards strangers that you didn't know. There was a potential that they were a god, and that's why you should treat them well. But for people that actually knew or in your circles and they're not gods, yeah, maybe there's a little bit of a difference in the moral standard for how you treat them. So yes, the Imago Dei, the image of God, this Christian doctrine, treating everybody with love and respect. I am very, very happy that it is being presented in a popular film positively. I just always want to reiterate, yes, but that came from somewhere, and it wasn't the Odyssey. It wasn't Bronze Age civilization or Homer. That came from Scripture, and it came from Jesus of Nazareth. And finally, I want to talk about the third change that Nolan makes to the Odyssey, which is that he removes gods as characters in the story. This is something that I've seen a lot of people point out. It's fairly obvious if you're familiar with the original Homer's version of the Odyssey, where Poseidon is a real character who gets offended, and that's what causes the sea and the storms to kind of turn against Odysseus. Athena is a real character who's offering wisdom and support. Calypso is a real goddess who has immortality and actually offers Odysseus immortality to stay with her. And when you watch Nolan's Odyssey, I believe that it starts with a title card that says something about apparent magic. And so it kind of sheds everything you're about to see in question of whether this is real. But even though there's like magic and creatures in this world, there's spooky creatures and very unsettling magic, there are no gods in the sense that you never see any gods. Poseidon is kind of treated, to me, he kind of felt more like a sailor's superstition, but it's almost treated the same as like, if you've ever seen Master and Commander, or like, yeah, just kind of like just sailors being superstitious, but like the movie doesn't necessarily treat that as like objectively true. You certainly never see a character of Poseidon. Athena is obviously kind of revealed to be more of a personification of Odysseus's guilt. Calypso doesn't offer Odysseus immortality, and it's unclear whether she even has it herself. But then, yeah, Zeus is never ever seen or shows up or does anything, but except for his law. And that's the big thing I want to talk about in this video, is how it was just strange to me that Zeus's law was so important to the movie, and yet Zeus is never seen or shows up or does anything. Like, isn't that a little strange? Because they keep on calling it Zeus's law, and yet you've removed Zeus and just gods in general from the story. And it's getting at this broader idea of like maintaining theistic morality, but removing God from the equation. And so I think removing gods from the film is very consistent with with Nolan's kind of artistic and aesthetic vision, which is, basically restraint. Showing the Cyclops in shadow, so you can't quite fully see him, or putting our perspective during the siren song with Odysseus's right-hand man, so that we can't actually hear the siren song. Or when Circe is doing her magic and turning the men into pigs, the camera is obscured by her body, and you can hear stuff, and you're kind of like, ooh, what's going on here? But you don't fully exactly see what is she. I mean, you know what she's doing, but like, how is she doing it? The camera is obscured, and so he does this very artistically, and I think that's what makes the movie the masterpiece that it is. That he is withholding, he is obscuring, he's keeping away from us some of the more sensationalist, magical elements. Except those are all still present in the story. The Cyclops might be hidden in shadow, but he is still there. And Cersei, you can't quite see how she's, other than that shot where she puts her hand down the guy's throat. Oh my gosh, that was not obscured. Okay, besides that shot though, it's kind of like, what's going on here, and the magic is real. It does do something in the story, whereas the gods, it seems, I think, a very plausible interpretation of the movie by the end is that the gods don't even exist. They are not real. And that besides these very eccentric creatures and some magic, they go to Hades and they encounter the dead, but there's never any gods, no personal gods, certainly. I think that's a very valid interpretation of the film. And even, it seems to me, maybe not the correct one, but the one that Nolan really wants to leave us with. That, you should probably be pretty suspicious that the gods are actually involved in the story in any way, or that they exist in any meaningful sense. And what that creates, again, with this vestigial limb idea, or this vestigial organ, is when you're emphasizing Zeus's law so much, but you remove Zeus, and the logic of Zeus's law is that Zeus might be the one showing up at your doorstep, and you don't, therefore, he deserves a lot of respect, and also that if you don't respect him, there's potential judgment and wrath to come from Zeus. If you remove Zeus as a character, it kind of removes the logic. Like, well, okay, wait, if there are no actual gods in this story, then why should I treat people as though they might be one? If there's no Zeus, why should I follow Zeus's law? Does that make sense? And obviously I'm seeing a lot of parallels in my mind to kind of more modern humanism, which Nolan is, kind of embodies in all of his films, basically taking theistic morality, that we are creatures of a God who has made us, and therefore we should obey his laws. And when we fail to obey those laws, he is going to judge and, punish us. A lot of people don't believe in God, but they still want to hold on to that morality, that it's objective and true, and that if you break it, you should be punished. But they don't want to acknowledge that, where is the source of this law? If it's coming from somewhere, where's this lawgiver that you're speaking of? And if there's no lawgiver, then is there any real law? And the way that Nolan kind of gets around this is, again, it's really brilliant and very, very well done, that he kind of locates it in the effect that law has on humans and human society. And so this is where you get into this universalizing theme of Zeus's law, where because Odysseus broke the law in Troy, that is now connected with like the seafarers who are bringing the end of a civilization. And so the objective grounding of that moral law is the effect it has on civilization. Human society works well when people follow this law. When we break this law, civilization does not do well. Therefore, we should follow the law. And so essentially it grounds the morality in humans, which is kind of a similar trick that he did in some of his other movies, especially like Interstellar, except that one is less about morality and maybe more providence. This idea that, is there like a path that we're supposed to follow? And in Christian theology, that we would say, yes, God is providentially guiding history, leading history, and that history is what God has planned for this place, that the future is in God's hands. And yet in Interstellar, there's kind of there is like a future being that is guiding us down this road. And yet that being is us. It's nothing outside of ourselves. It's humans. It's humanity. There is providence, and it's whatever humans want to do. And in a similar way, in the Odyssey, there is objective morality, and it's whatever leads to human flourishing. And so it's kind of connecting these ideas that are normally rooted in God, and they're kind of, he's tying them to humans. It's a human-centric view of morality and providence and things like that. And again, I was very impressed with it, and I genuinely loved the movie. And so this is not a critique of the movie. Just please, I am not critiquing Nolan's film, The Odyssey. It is an amazing work of art. I am critiquing Nolan's worldview that he is communicating masterfully through his movie. This humanist idea that humans are the center, that we need to tie morality to whatever causes human civilization to flourish. That is what good morals are. Because again, it makes the whole logic of Zeus's law, nonsensical. If the whole point of Zeus's law is that Zeus might be the one at your doorstep, and therefore he might be the one that's judging you if you fail to show him hospitality, but there is no real Zeus, there's no respect given, as well as there's no opportunity or chance. There's no chance for divine retribution. There's nobody that's going to punish you for failing to follow Zeus's law. Which, to be fair, this is what we see in Odysseus, which is Odysseus taking matters into his own hands. 108 suitors have failed to show his wife and son, to honor Zeus's law. They've taken advantage of it. They've broken it. And so Zeus doesn't show up to punish them. Odysseus does. He takes his bow and dishes out judgment. And I think that's kind of what we're left with when we remove any divine sense of morality. When all that we're left with morality is that it's human-centered, it means that humans are responsible for dishing out judgment when people break that law. If you're like me, sometimes when you look at the news or the stuff that's going on in the world, there can be a great sense of there's a lot of injustice going on, and I want to see people face the consequences of their breaking of God's law. And when that fails to happen and people escape that justice, it can really make me upset. It can make me very angry and frustrated. And it can tempt me to want to reach for a bow like Odysseus and say, I'm going to dish out, justice. But the thing is that I'm not, I don't have the power to actually dish out that justice. I'm not Odysseus, and nor do I have the responsibility, because I trust that Jesus Christ is the judge of the living and the dead, that there will be ultimate punishment for those who have broken God's law. And I take great comfort in that. I think that's one of the things that prevents, that Christianity offers, that breaks the cycle of violence. Because obviously, actually, Nolan's Odyssey does address this a little bit. There's this question of what about the families of those that he just slaughtered? It's why he doesn't want Telemachus involved in any real way. Odysseus is going to take this upon himself. It kind of reminded me of Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino, where he kind of is like, I'm going to do what needs to be done, and I'll receive the consequences. Because then what does he do? He just leaves. Odysseus just leaves in case there's any, retribution or the cycle of violence that the families of these men that have been killed might come after him. Well, he's peacing out and he's gone. Whether or not those families would then dish that vengeance out on, Telemachus is, that's left for, maybe a sequel or something. Obviously not. But so Nolan's Odyssey addresses it a little bit. But what Odysseus did will likely lead to this cycle of violence, which is what we see throughout human history over and over again, is that when real evils are done and somebody feels like the need to take that justice into their own hands, to make sure that those people face the consequences for the evils they've done. What that can tend towards is a cycle of violence. Whereas when you know that there is going to be ultimate judgment, that when people seemingly leave this life without having faced really the consequences of their actions, there is a peace knowing, okay, they're not getting away with anything. There is a judge. So anyway, that's something that I find really attractive about Christianity, and the ways that it helps stop the cycles of violence so you don't feel the need to take things into your own hands. The finale of the Odyssey is obviously very satisfying. I don't think it's an actually good way to approach injustices like that. even if it is cathartic, in almost like a John Wick style, just watching somebody get what's coming to them. Um, but yeah, so Nolan's changing. So the fact that Nolan changed Zeus's law by removing Zeus, I think, kind of shows how empty that can be. Where without an actual God, if you don't really believe that people are made in the image of God because you don't believe in God, I don't really know why you would find them valuable, any more valuable than any animals. And if you don't believe that there's any divine justice or judgment coming for those who break that law, I don't think that there's any reason to not become Odysseus and for us to dish out punishment in this life. But I digress. Those are my thoughts after watching Nolan's Odyssey. I'm really excited to watch it again. I was able to watch it in 70 millimeter IMAX. Oh, baby. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. I don't know how much more to say. I just wanted to share my thoughts. If you guys have anything to add, if you disagree with anything I said, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Obviously, Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey is going to be the movie we're talking about for quite a few weeks. I think it's going to be the definitive version of Homer's Odyssey for at least the next 50 years, if not like 100 years. Like, this is a very important film, which is why I've been excited for it since it was announced that Nolan was going to be making this as his next project. I've been following the news about the production, the difficulties that they keep on mentioning. I'm just so I am so happy that we got this movie this year. It was so satisfying. I loved it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it again. Please let me know about what you thought about the movie, its themes, changes that he made, whether you liked them, disagreed with them, anything like that. As always, I appreciate your thoughts and would love to know what you think. Thanks for watching.